And welcome back, everybody, to Philosophy for the People. We're back here for another round of Marxist Monday,
Marcus
working
Monday.
through One Dimensional Man. And Dr. Jim, good to see you, as
Good to see
always.
you. Marcus Monday, Christmas edition.
Yes, Merry Christmas,
Merry
comrades.
Christmas,
Great to see.
comrade. Merry
Great to
Christmas,
see.
comrade. Yeah,
Great to see all of you. Check out the
excellent.
sloth. Yeah,
I love the sloth. Right.
yeah.
I'm rocking a gorilla kettlebell t-shirt myself.
Nice, man. We're always keeping it fresh here at Philosophy for the People. So we're now on chapter 8. We're almost done with this,
We're almost
Jim.
done with this. Yeah.
We are almost done. So before we dive in, let me make a few brief announcements. If you haven't caught the series we did on Leibniz, I mean, what a wonderful contrast.
Yes.
Go check that out. That was a nice sort of 3-part series. I really enjoyed it. We went
It was
through
crisp.
It was very crisp, and we went through the ultimate origination of things and studied the mad genius that was Leibniz. So that was pretty sweet. We've got some nice shorter form highlight videos coming out. Big shout out to Olivia, who is who's got her own YouTube channel at Catholic Girl Talk. So if any of you are interested in that, check it out. Support Olivia. She's doing a nice job with that. So we hope that these shorter form videos, are maybe something you guys can share with your grandmother and sort of entice her to the larger conversation.
Yeah,
And,
it makes for good conversation around the Yule log, right? And
indeed, yeah,
right.
of course, yeah.
I know. So we're coming to the end of our second bigger series, right? So our first one was the Republic, right, and then the second was One Dimensional Man, with a little Leibniz sprinkled in between, like showing that we are philosophical generalists here at Philosophy for the People, right? Like most good teachers of philosophy are, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
as you must be if you're doing
Yep.
philosophy proper.
Yep.
Okay, so Jim, it's probably been about a week since our last Marcuse episode, right? So why don't you give us the little refresher here, because chapter 8 is some real good stuff. Problem of universals is coming up. I mean, this is like the problem of philosophy. Marcuse is going to take it up. So remind us of the things that we need to be remembering.
This is another one of those chapters where you're going to mostly find yourself saying, well, with enemies like these, who needs friends, right? As far as Marcuse goes. So as always, we go back to the table of contents, right, and situate what we're doing. Last time we finished, obviously, chapter 7, which was the triumph of positive thinking, one-dimensional philosophy, and that is the culminating moment in the second part of the book, one-dimensional thought, where he is basically talking about what he sees as the truncated intellectual culture that we've inherited mainly in the university in light of this technological domination of really Western civilization, right? Okay, but especially in the Anglo-American speaking world, right? And what he's done in those 3 chapters in one-dimensional thought, well, in the first section, one-dimensional society, he talks about how our political structure has eliminated the possibility of any real legitimate disagreement, right? That all of the oppositions have been absorbed into an overall consumerist, media-driven capitalist machine, such that there's only one way to really look at things. And then he's moved into one-dimensional thought to say the same thing has happened, not just politically but intellectually, right?
Yes.
In the arts, in the academy, that we have really a monolithic academic culture, is what he's claiming in one-dimensional thought in the second part of the book. Okay. And so you can think of the first 2 parts of the book are his, like, this is sort of the straitjacket he thinks we find ourselves in politically and intellectually, right? In this totalitarian, kind of dystopian nightmare, but a quiet dystopia, right? Okay, now in the last section of the book, the chance of the alternatives is where we're going to get Marcuse sort of like saying, okay, here's how we can go forward. Here's how we can like break out of this totalitarian stranglehold that we're in. Okay, and the first section of that is the historical commitment of philosophy. Okay, and it's interesting. So for Marcuse, it's very different. Once again, he's not a classical Marxist, and he's kind of trying to re-Hegel Marx. Okay, for the Marxist, philosophy is going to do no work whatsoever in bringing about the revolution. It's dialectical materialism, right? It's Hegel turned on its head. So ideas make no difference, right? Intellectual culture makes no difference. It's got to be done in the streets. Okay. But think of the big picture of the book here is what Marcuse is saying is, well, If what we're dealing with is totalitarianism, and totalitarianism is not about physical control, it's about intellectual and mental and spiritual control. If that's what binds us now, then actually the liberation will come intellectually. It will come
Yes.
through philosophy, right?
Hmm.
And in many ways, so it's sort of like we can see what he's doing. He's trying to take the Marxist turning Hegel on his head to turn Marx back on his head to kind of have a Hegelian way into this, right? But still,
Yeah.
like Hegel is not motivated by liberating the proletariat, right? So it's still Marxism, right? But it's a
Yes.
Hegelianized Marxism, an
Right.
interesting twist to that. Okay.
Hmm.
All right. So this chapter is the chance of alternatives, the historical commitment to philosophy, right?
Indeed. Cheers.
All
What
right.
do you drink? What are you drinking there, good doctor?
A little coffee, a little
Little
coffee.
coffee. All right.
Yeah,
I'm on
good
tea today.
coffee.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm going to stretch the fast out a little bit after a pretty high calorie holiday weekend.
Yeah.
Right. So
Tis necessary.
it is
Yes.
necessary. Yeah. No,
Mhm.
one has to be able to feast, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So here we are in historical commitment to philosophy. All right. Is there anything you want to add up front as we?
No, I think that's a great summary. So let's dive right in. Mhm.
Okay. So as Pat mentioned, Marcuse, says that he's returning to the problem of universals. Okay. And this is one of the things I think that surprises the reader about Marcuse is he sees nominalism, right? This denial that there are universals as one of the primary sort of blind spots, or like the one of the primary things that like keeps philosophy in the contemporary university from being an actual radical revolutionary factor. Okay. Not kind of what you expect out of Marcuse, right? And it's interesting
I was surprised. I
yeah,
was. Mhm.
and as you'll see in this chapter, his main polemical target here is Quine, right?
Mhm.
He's going after Quine, because Quine is, the sort of the most unapologetic nominalist maybe ever to walk the earth. Okay,
Mhm.
all right, and so and once again there's this
Jim,
go
real
ahead.
quick, do we want to, for the gentle listeners, I know many of our listeners will be familiar with the debate. Do we want to just quickly
Sure,
summarize the different positions of realism and nominalism
yeah,
and what they are, if you
you want
wouldn't
to jump
mind?
in? Go ahead and do it. Yeah,
Yeah, no, because I mean, I think it's important because one has heard it said that the problem of philosophy just is the problem of universals, right?
one over the midi. Yep.
But people say that philosophy often reduces to one problem all the time. So
Yeah,
take that with a grain of salt. But if there's a candidate, right, that you
yeah,
could say that about, I think this is one of them. But most people probably have, uh, unless they're in the world of philosophy, have almost no familiarity with what we're
right,
talking about. So
right.
how do you introduce your? Let me ask you this: how do you introduce your philosophy students to the problem of the one and many?
That's a good question.
Mhm.
I do it in much the way that Marcuse does in this chapter is just basically through the sorts of puzzles that Plato points out,
Yeah.
right? About how he'll point out, how if you look at any individual thing, it does seem to both fit and not fit any definition you could give of it, right? So then there's a question of, what ultimately accounts for its being similar to the other things that fit that same definition when every individual both is and is not that way. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that begins to recommend that for over and above the individuals, there must be the universal, right? That is what they are, right? And also what they're not, right?
Mhm.
Which then gives you this notion of a separation of the universal from the individual, and now you're on your way to realism. Okay,
Yeah. Mhm.
and the what the nominalist will argue is there is no such separation, right? There is, but ultimately by arguing that there is no true definition of anything at all,
Yeah.
right? It's
Mhm.
all just nominal, right? And so the way I used to do it very differently, but now the way I do is I just introduce it the way Plato introduces the problem in the dialogues. Yeah,
Right, and that's actually a good little introduction right there, right? And then, of course, even within realism, there's many different camps, right?
many
Okay,
different
well,
camps.
how do
Yeah,
we, there's extreme realism, there's moderate realism. I don't know if we
yeah,
need or should, or scholastic realism. We probably don't need to go through all those now, but it is ultimately the commitment that there is the one before the many,
right.
right? There is the
Yeah,
one before the many, the
right,
unity before diversity.
right,
And so I guess that's just probably some important background before
right.
we go further here. So yeah, take us
Yeah,
back up
and
wherever you
actually,
want. Mhm.
that way of putting it can be very helpful for what he's going to do. All
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
So Marcuse begins a chapter by pointing out how and he has in mind here sort of like naturalistic versions of contemporary analytic philosophy, right? Especially in the '60s when he's writing this. are dismissive of anything, and he gives the examples of mind, consciousness, the good, the will, God, all these things, because they cannot be verified among empirically available individual things. Okay.
Mhm.
And thereby, you know, they'll try to like do a reductive analysis of all those concepts in terms of individuals. Okay. In terms of individuals. All right. And so it's a kind of nominalism. So there is no one above the many. There's just the many, and we have certain conventions for talking about the many uh, that give us the illusion that there's a one that unifies them, but that's really just practical.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
really just convenient, and there is no fact of the matter about the will or the mind or the soul or God or what is
Right.
good and best and all that. These are just conventions, right?
Right. And
Just yeah, go ahead.
convention being a universal.
Convention being universal, yeah.
Right.
And it's interesting. Okay, so now uh Marcuse the Marxist, right, he's not going to have this, okay, because he points out, he goes to examples. If you look over on page 205, he says, you know, if you take uh, the British Constitution, the University of Oxford, England, right? He'll go on and give other examples: the U.S. Congress, the Central Committee, right? He's thinking about the Soviet Union, right? The president, the trustees of the university, the faculty. He's saying all of these are one over a many, right? There's many individuals on the faculty, but they constitute a faculty over and above that. There's many people on the Central Committee of the Soviet, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And he's saying, if you're saying that there is no one over the many, he's going to say that there are facts that you cannot account for, right? He's giving this sort of non-reductive account of things like Oxford University, the Constitution, right? He's saying they make a difference in the world, right? Okay, that in fact, like that there is such a thing as the Central Committee, right, over and above the individuals, because the Central Committee has an effect on the individuals that constitute it,
Yeah.
right? Okay, do you see that?
Yeah,
So,
I found those to be interesting examples, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, because I could see ways that anomalists could push back against those. Yeah, and
yeah,
I'm sure
yeah,
you see that as well.
yeah,
Whereas other examples like man, fat woman, uh,
yeah,
freedom,
yeah,
justice, God, these are not going to be so susceptible to notions of social construct, say,
right,
or
right,
being a mere aggregate or something like
right,
that.
right,
So I just found it interesting
yeah,
that he picked those
yeah.
examples rather than some of the more traditional uh,
He
universals. Yeah, you see what I'm
he
saying?
he picked those because he needs them for his project, right?
Yeah, so
Okay,
it's a
yeah, okay.
political motivation.
It's a
Yeah.
political motive, like so much, right? Okay,
Mhm.
so because think of it, take like your, you know, your snottiest like mid-century Gilbert Ryle kind of analysis of like politics, right? You know,
Mhm.
well, you know, oh, you think, you know, the University of Oxford is a thing, right? But it's not, right? You know, you're looking for it to be this extra thing over and above the buildings and all this, right?
Yeah.
And really, it's just the buildings in a kind of relationship, et cetera, et cetera. Okay,
Right.
this kind of behavioral analysis, right?
Right.
Well, think of it, is the Marxist is saying no, the the university is an oppressive force, right?
Mhm.
Okay, it is a thing and it needs to be gotten rid of, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
if there's no reality of that one uniting the many that makes a difference, right? Then
Yeah.
there's no Marxist project to be had, right?
Mhm.
Like he's
Mhm.
once again seen like physicalism and behaviorism and all forms of reductionism are actually deeply antithetical to the Marxist project,
Yeah,
because
that's
the
that's
very
so
entities,
funny. Yeah.
isn't it funny? Yeah, the very entities that the Marxist is saying are the oppressive structures,
Right.
that kind of physicalism eliminates from our ontology. And
Right.
he's
So
saying, no,
they can't be a problem if they don't exist.
yeah, yeah, no, and this is brilliant. This is why he thinks, you know,
Right.
all like basically like naturalism is a tool of the status
It's a
quo.
tool of the man. Yeah.
It's a tool of the man, right? It's a tool of the man, right? Because
Mhm.
it all these things that like the key, Marcuse is trying to argue for this really. This is why he's going after Quine. He wants to argue
Mhm.
against Quine's desert landscape here. He wants a very rich, clouded, enchanted ontology where Oxford University and the Soviet
It's
and
a
the British
substance.
Constitution, these are substances, these are real things.
Right.
They are
Yeah.
universals that make a difference. And we need to take action to
Yeah.
change these things, right? To get
Wow.
rid of them.
So his ontology might be even more inflated than mine. I never thought I'd
No,
say
yeah,
that of
no,
a
he's
Marxist.
no, that's exactly it. He's argued in this chapter. So my advisor at Kent State was
Yeah.
a guy named Quanse Lee, just a gem of a human being, right? And a man who entered the university before political correctness and and used that to be claimed to be naive about what the rules were, right? Okay,
I love him.
I
I
can't.
love him already.
There's many things I couldn't quote by Quanse now, and God rest his soul. But anyway, so Quanse had he liked to parse the world between ontological people who are ontologically prudish and people who are ontologically promiscuous, right?
Right.
Okay, and I can't remember who it was, but there was someone he claimed to be um, an ontological whore,
I
right?
knew it was coming.
Yeah, okay, right. And so like Quanse would say, here we go. Sorry, would say that Marcuse is arguing for an extreme ontological promiscuity, right? He needs to let lots of stuff in that maybe he doesn't need to, right? Okay,
Right.
but for the Marxist project, he needs a rich ontology. Yeah.
Right. He is
Okay.
the
And yeah,
metaphysical lady of the night.
exactly. Right. There you go. That's one for the meta. Right.
There's one for the highlight clip. Mark
We're
that.
we're in
Mark.
we're in the metaphysical red light district now, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. And so, but you get why, like Marcuse, I think is rightly seen that the Marxist cannot go forward, and that's been one of the
Right.
surprising themes of this whole book, right?
Well, this makes a lot of sense to
Yeah.
me because I was wondering. I mean, if it fits now. So I've been up since 1:30 a.m. So
Yeah. Yeah.
forgive me, as the gentle listeners don't know, it's been an interesting morning. But I'm like, okay, if he's going to refute nominalism, like I don't think that's hard, and he's kind of picking some odd examples.
Yeah.
But now seeing that it really is a political motivation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
one can understand why he's picking these examples, but of course, I think he probably is going to overinflate his ontology.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
it
yeah.
sounds like he's going to need to, right, to push
Needs
his
to.
sort of project
Needs
forward,
to.
right?
Yeah. And you can see what he's saying. He's saying, look, comrades, right? Citizens, right? Um, we have to see who our enemies really are, right? And it's funny, a lot of times he's come out in this chapter in this book and say, yeah, I kind of have common cause with these mid-century Thomists and these these kind of classical Aristotelian types who are critical of the status as we find it now, and they're realists and they think philosophy has an actual ideational role in all this, right? And he's going all the way with that and saying, we are not in league with these kind of reductive Quinean naturalists, right? Because what they're doing is they are saying the very monsters that oppress us don't really exist. Right. It's sort of like, you hear what the devil wants you to think he doesn't exist. Right. Similarly, what Marcuse is saying here is the man wants you to think he doesn't exist.
Right.
Right. Right. You're like, or that that there is no
Right.
there is no system. There's just the people in the system.
Yeah,
Right.
and his trick is naturalism. That's interesting.
And his trick is naturalism. Yeah. Okay. So it's an interesting question to what degree you would even characterize Marcuse as a naturalist, right?
Well, I mean, my gripe about naturalism, man, it's so freaking meaningless these days because this is something I'm gonna rant about when I go on.
Go for it.
Not right now. I'll spare the gentles, but I'm going on our friend John DeRosa's podcast soon. It's just like, stop saying you're a naturalist. Just give me your damn theory. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, what is your theory? What is your ontology? What is your foundation? What are you committed to? What are you not committed to? Because when somebody just says I'm a naturalist now, it doesn't mean anything, right? It could be anything. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could, even with his criticism, I guess you could still be a naturalist because I've met naturalists that are Platonists these days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That strikes me as extremely odd, but
right.
Apparently you can do that, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, Quine's desert landscapes are less in vogue as they were when this was written. So if you look at on page 211, that first paragraph at the top, reading with Marcuse here, the protest against the vague, obscure metaphysical character of such universals, the insistence on familiar concreteness and protective security of common and scientific sense, still reveals something of that primordial anxiety which guided the recorded origins of philosophical thought and its evolution from religion to mythology and from mythology to logic. Defense and security still are large items in the intellectual as well as the national budget. The unpurged experience seems to be more familiar with the abstract and the universal than is the analytic philosophy. It seems to be embedded in a metaphysical world, right? I mean, so he's saying like our, and he goes on in the next, just let me read the next line here. He says, universals are primary elements of experience. Universals not as philosophical concepts, but as very qualities of the world with which one is daily confronted. Okay, so I mean, he's saying like we live in a metaphysically rich world, and there is no sense to be made of just basic experience, right, without understanding it as cognized through universals.
Yes,
right.
Undoubtedly, that's correct.
And then what that kicks off now in the chapter is a bunch of Hegelian analyses defending universals as conditions of experience.
Yeah, right. I mean, it goes back to that wonderful rant you had against scientism, right? Of how all science happens in the world of lived experience, such that if we start to even deny that everything that is required to even make conceptual sense of the scientific enterprise goes with it, right? And same thing here. To even get to a position of nominalism, certainly I would argue, requires that you've lived in with realism, right? You've assumed realism. So I mean, and nominalism is notorious for its self-defeat issues, right? It's got
exactly.
It's got and it's so I guess it's not surprising then that and many philosophers have pointed this out, that nominalism and positivism and scientism, these things tend to flirt with one another quite regularly, right?
Yeah. Now, what he does is, he gives, and this will be maybe difficult for us to reproduce here because there's a lot in the background, but he then gives a Hegelian analysis of the universal. Okay. And it's important, but I also think you can find this in Plato too, is, in the universal, in the one that unites the many, it includes both what the many is and what it is not. Okay. So in recognizing, Pat as a human, right? In as much as I'm recognizing Pat as a human, I'm also recognizing that he's not the definition of a human because he's not Jim, right? So in recognizing Pat as a human, as putting him as one of the many under that one, I'm both getting what he is and what he is not. Okay, so there's an inherent affirmation and negativity that's wrapped up in this notion of realism for Marcuse, for Hegel, and I even think for Plato too. Okay, but we understand things both in terms of what they are and what they are not. Okay, and so what Marcuse is going to argue here is, in understanding, say, that Pat is a human, right? I'm understanding that Pat is both human and he's falling short of what humanity could be. Okay. So this comes up in the chapter quite a bit, where Marcuse says, so there's always a forward-looking possibility, right, of what human could be. Okay. And if it's forward-looking, it's also backward-looking too, right? There's what human was that it is now in light of the possibility that it could be. Okay.
Yes.
This is the historical turn here, right? This is where Marcuse says, so to be a realist of this Hegelian sort is to see things in a historical context. Like, we've got a bunch of individuals that are constituted as human now, right? But they are all not exactly what it is to be human, and therefore it's a moving target. What the humans are a moving target.
Yeah, and this is not, just to make a point of contrast, this is not to say that I'm failing in terms of a privationist account because of my bad eyesight or something like that, right? It's a much more kind of horizontal understanding of concept, right? Really a diachronic understanding of concept. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. Everything's diachronic in this Hegelian view. Right. And maybe for Plato, okay, right? It's complicated, I think, for Plato, okay. And so the idea now is this is where it's going to get like kind of interesting for the Marxist and Marcuse, is in being a realist, there's a kind of historicism built into this, right? It's seeing things, admitting that we can only recognize things as many under a one, but in recognizing them as many, we're realizing that our historical moment is partly constitutive of the individuals that we have, and thereby it can change,
Mhm.
right? And maybe we can play a role in the changing of it.
Right.
Do you see that?
Mhm.
Okay. So what he does, we get some like great ranting about Quine, right? All right. And if you go over to page 220,
Go in there now.
yeah,
I've arrived.
a second here.
We have the
We'll cut to it.
the little list here. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So if you look at, I'm just going to read a little bit from here, if you don't mind. At the
Please.
top of 220, second line, it is with reference to such a transcendent project that the criteria for objective historical truth can best be formulated as the criteria of its rationality. Okay, so you're saying, so there's a transcendental aspect here, like we, in the Kantian sense, is that we human beings are able to stand back from our individuated empirical experience and put it under concepts, right?
Mhm.
Put it under universals, right? But in doing that, and this is the Hegelian turn, we recognize that there's a historical contingency to that. Like we're dealing with the individuals that were given by a historical process, and they were different in the past. They're going to be different in the future. Okay.
Right.
And so what Marcuse wants to argue is, even though you have that historicism, there's still an objective truth we can get to here.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So, and he spells that out in this list of things we get at top of 220, right? So first, the transcendent project must be in accordance with the real possibilities opened at the attained level of the material and the intellectual culture, right? So we have to admit that we can't do more than what our material embodiment allows for us, right? And also that we are going to in some ways be limited by the cultural historical moment that we're in. Okay.
Right.
So we can't just make something up. Like we can't just have wishful thinking, right?
Mhm.
We're still embodied beings. We still speak a certain language, et cetera, et cetera. Two, the transcendent project, in order to falsify the established totality, must demonstrate its own higher rationality in the threefold sense that, okay, then it gives us three senses. It's higher rationality. It offers the prospect of preserving and improving the productive achievements of civilization. It defines the established totality in its very structure, base tendencies, and relations. And finally, its realization offers a greater chance for the pacification of existence within the framework of institutions, which offer a greater chance for the free development of human needs and faculties. All sounds fine, right? Now, obviously, this notion of rationality contains, especially in the last statement, a value judgment. And I reiterate what I stated before. I believe that the very concept of reason with a capital R originates in this value judgment, and that the concept of truth cannot be divorced from the value of reason. Okay. Okay. Now, so what he's saying is the only way that we can avoid just a sort of a historical relativism is if we assume that there's an ultimate capital R reason that gives us a kind of like moral mandate, or lets us understand what is the best and the good and the true and the beautiful, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Now, I think agree. Okay. So like I can go almost 100% with everything he's doing in this chapter, right?
Mhm.
Okay. But no, like that value judgment for Marcuse just got pulled out of the ether.
Yes. Right.
You see, it just got pulled out of the ether, right?
Mhm.
Like there's nothing in what he's going to argue as a Marxist that's going to ground that value judgment.
That's it. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Do
Mhm.
you see what I mean? So, and this is where in this chapter, I think
And this is and this is too big of a thing to pull out of the ether.
he pulls it out of the ether.
Too
Yeah,
too big. Right.
it's
Mhm.
out of the ether. Yeah, and so my point here is in the chapter is like, yeah, we need realism to like ground any kind of critique, and nominalism I love this, is itself a tool of the status quo, of the oppressive totalitarianism.
Right.
Agreed. 100% agree with him. 100% agree with him. Right.
Mhm.
Two, I do accept a Platonic Hegelian notion of conceptuality containing both positivity and negativity, therefore it's historically grounded, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, agreed. Help yourself to disagree, right? But I agree. Thirdly, I agree that we can avoid a virulent historical relativism, right, by assuming there is an absolute transcendent perspective, right? A God's eye perspective on things that humans have some inkling of, right? Agreed 100%. The problem is, okay, where is this guy deriving that from?
Yeah, where does this fit in your worldview?
Right.
Marcuse.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is just always, I guess, I don't know, man. This is just so much of the issue I have with so much modern leftist thought is it doesn't tend to ever be fully systematic.
Right.
Now, say what you want about theism, or even classical theism, but classical theism is really a theory of everything. It is a theory of everything. Marcuse is giving us theories, but he clearly lacks a theory of everything. And he's trying to put something into his theory here that lacks a proper support or proper foundation.
Yeah.
And it's such a big part that if this thing isn't supported properly, then everything that is on top of it, which is a whole lot, is going to come tumbling down with it.
Yeah.
This is why philosophy needs to be systematic, right? I don't think there's any other way to do philosophy. That's why we talk about you need to be a generalist, right? And in fact, that's what interests me so much about philosophy of religion in particular, is I think to do that well, it demands that you be systematic, right? Because everything connects with everything else. So this is where I've often just been, and it's not just leftist philosophy, it's so much modern philosophy. It just fails to be systematic in a way that traditional philosophy, whether you think it's right or wrong, at least attempted to be systematic, right? It really did try to give a full theory of everything, soup to nuts, how metaphysics relates to ethics, how it all ties back to gods and the eternal ideas, all of it, right? There's a system there. Again, right or wrong, we can have that discussion, but at least people tried to link everything up into a true theory of everything, right?
Exactly. Agreed, 100%. And so, and this is kind of my, running critique of Marcuse throughout this book, right? I think there's two lines of it for me. Like, first, there's his notion of what liberation would be is the liberation from constraint entirely, right? Like for him to be free of the totalitarian system is not to return to a kind of structured culture and an enchanted nature, but it really is kind of just a complete liberation of the individual from any kind of constraint. Okay. And which I just think,
except maybe the constraint of capital R reason.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but exactly. It says except for capital R reason. And this is the second mode of the critique, is it seems the whole thing presupposes that capital R reason, and I just don't know where he's pulling that out of the ether from. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But then, right. So what is freedom then, Marcuse, right? Is it just freedom of all constraints? Because if so, then you've got a tension here within yourself, right? If it's not freedom,
it's the barn orgy, man. Right?
Yeah. If it's not freedom from all constraints, which it seems like you need it to not be that, to be consistent with yourself, then it's not freedom from all constraints. And it's something more like learning the steps of a particular dance, right?
Yeah.
And now we are veering back really towards a sort of traditional, broadly Aristotelian Platonic mode of life. So it seems like he's just trying to dance a middle ground that cannot be danced, that cannot be sustained, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to go one way or another, right? You're going to either have to go with capital R reason and realize, okay, there's a real structure to reality, right? And true freedom is found in dance, not chance, right? If you're going with chance, then it seems to me like you're kind of stuck with a fundamental absurdism, which I don't think is sustainable. But
which he rightly rejects. Right.
But like that isn't what you want. You don't want an absurdism. You can't have it. So it just seems to me that this strikes me again as a constant theme of so much modern philosophy. They're trying to have a middle ground or stay on a middle ground that simply does not exist. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think in the final sections of this book, this is where it's going to most come out, right? Is because I'm very sympathetic to the negative side of what he's doing, the critique, right? And that came in the first two sections of the book. Now in the last section, where he wants to turn that into something affirmative, it seems like he has to appeal to a transcendent stance that it's unclear to me from what source he's going to take that, right? And as we talked about earlier, this is what's led Marxists like McIntyre back into the tradition, like looking for a solid position from which they can operate these kinds of neo-Marxist critiques. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is a great compliment to the tradition, right? Because
Yeah.
first, McIntyre is a great thinker, but like if somebody consistently is a key word, kind of pushes in this direction, it seems to me very difficult how they could not really end up where
Yeah.
McIntyre
Yeah.
ended up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think you're just going to have to live with the pain of inconsistency, which I
Yeah.
guess Marcuse did, or at the very
Or
least, incompleteness,
yeah,
right?
or and the thing is too is the only one of his writings I'm really familiar with is One Dimensional Man. So I don't know what he does in later stuff, right? And
Yeah.
he might realize his problem and go.
I
go in
didn't
it yeah.
get news that he turned out like McIntyre,
No,
but maybe
he definitely doesn't make the turn, right, that McIntyre makes, right? There's other turns he may have taken, and maybe he does go off the rails of postmodernity in a way that he doesn't in this book, right? Because this book, it seems like repeatedly we're getting an appeal to the classics, right? An appeal to the classics, right? In a way, or like at least to say that there was something that they got right. But once again, he doesn't seem to want the expense that's going to come along with accepting that classical philosophical approach. Yeah.
yeah, spot
Yeah.
on. Great summary, Jim. Anything else you want to say
No,
about
that's all I
this
have in
chapter
that one. Yeah.
before
Yeah.
we sign off here?
And so I think next time, if people are following on the reading, let's just go ahead and let's just finish it next time because the conclusion is rather short.
Yep. Yeah. So
We'll go ahead and do 9 and 10 next time.
We'll do 9 and 10 next time and wrap this fun. This has been a great series, man.
Been a great
Really
series.
enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Really enjoyed it.
It's funny. It's just been me like confronting myself, my 22-year-old self.
Yeah, we brought you into the time machine, Jim, between
exactly.
between Marcuse and Leibniz. We've really
Yeah.
kind of brought
Yeah.
you back like 2 decades, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good stuff. All
and
right,
now it's talking about Quanse Lee too. So yeah, it's all
yeah.
full circle.
Gentle listeners, thanks for tuning in. Hope you guys have been enjoying the series. Hello to Duong. I see Duong here.
Duong.
Good to see you, Duong. Duong, we got something I think you might like coming around 1 p.m. today. So stay tuned for that stream. Everyone else will catch you on the next episode.
Get
power to the people.
Power to the people. Revolution will not be televised,
but it will be live streamed. Adios.